the benefit to our residents overall in this community. So not just feeling like this is a downtown or Mayo initiative, but really
but given my former municipal budget director ruts, I really appreciate the sensitivity about the upfront capital investment and the obligation that creates for maintenance and operation long term. I think this would be a good issue for us to have some conversation on maybe next year about, how confident are we that our processes allow for that consideration. And I think it is certainly the case that we would not want the city or the county, for that matter, to the extent that that's applicable, to feel like there's so much momentum behind a capital investment that they don't have the opportunity to say the value that we get from this investment isn't worth the long-term O&M obligation that it creates. I don't expect that the DMC will be, seeking any kind of statutory change to allow us to also fund O&M costs. So that sensitivity, I appreciate. It's very real. And in the end, I think we would feel more confident if we knew and understood that there's consensus that the upfront capital generates enough value to find a way to fund the O&M, whether that's by reallocating existing resources, or whether it's considering whether, overall it's going to, push you over the edge about some kind of levy impact. And then the other thing that I would just add, so I think it'd be good for us to understand, are our processes and relationships set up in such a way so that everyone feels like they can fairly test that sensitivity before, the train has picked up so much steam that it's hard to have that conversation. And then the second thing I would say is I would really appreciate, I'm still kind of like Member Williams, thinking about the purpose of DMC is really around kind of creating the infrastructure and the culture of Rochester to prompt additional investments, whether that's Mayo or Mayo related or non-Mayo related. And I think we probably would be well served by coming back and talking about, what is the public information piece of our individual and collective efforts to help the community appreciate what value they may be getting out of these investments, whether it's something that they directly participate in or not, whether they never come down to heart of the city or whether they never go to the Chateau Theater. What, from a community perspective, what is the benefit to tax base, to employment opportunities, to the health and vitality of the school system? I think there's something there that we need to do more work on that shared understanding, and I hope we can build that into our work plan somehow for next year.
Very, very noted and agreed. Go ahead, Mayor.
Yeah, and I'll just add a little extra to that. I really appreciate those comments. I think our city council, which has had 4 new members this year, has had a lot to learn about DMC over this last year, and they're coming along. They're learning. We have to continue to remember that communication is vital about the decisions. And we had a really interesting discussion at the city council meeting where the city talked about those O&M, those operation and maintenance costs, the ongoing costs that the city has. And, perhaps as we move along, I would anticipate the city council will be asking more about that earlier on. In this instance, I would say a lot of these decisions, as has been talked about, were the start of these were back in 2018, 2017, 2018, 2019. And so some of the discussion that they're having now has been had here, but they weren't part of it. And I think it was a reminder to me that we can't just make assumptions and we're going to be getting some new board members here at this table, that it may be a good time as we bring people on here to also bring people on in the community. And I think to Pam's point, having that really good community discussion about the value is not just about putting in pavers. The value is after those pavers are in and businesses open, and think of it generationally, not just me, not just what's happening to me and the impact on me right now, but and to be really cognizant of the impact this might have on businesses now, but that this is a generational change and that there will be advantages in future years for our children and our grandchildren, new businesses, new people that come to this city. So I think communication is really going to be key, and reinvigorating messages that we may have had in the past that we think we've talked about, but we haven't talked about them to the new people. So just a reminder of that, but thanks.
These are really good points. And again, Council President and Mayor, it's super helpful to bring in that perspective from councils. And I think, Mayor, you make a good point about new members, how we partner with them, et cetera. A couple points that I think are important. This is a capital expense, and it comes through in our strategy, not only in itself, but as part of a capital budget. I mention that because at an earlier stage, we recognized the importance of making our investments to help the city leverage or their investments or not have to make some. For instance, when we look at sewer costs, for instance, technically the residents of the state of Minnesota are paying for some capital improvements that the residents of Rochester would pay if they were in any other city. The state is putting $500 million in here, but it's not only additive. We're doing our very best to actually take expenses that would fall on a homeowner here if there was no destination medical center. And those are perfectly legitimate things to do. If we coordinate our spending, a homeowner here gets less cost. In addition, when we're looking at a new building coming in, an enormous tax base growth has taken place here. One of the strategies that we could really look at would be to capture some of that new money that's coming into the city and use it to fund a service district that could fund maintenance so that it does not fall on the residences of Rochester. Meaning, like in downtown Minneapolis, Member Doherty and my business pay through our rent an additional fee to have additional maintenance, service workers on the street, et cetera, et cetera. We don't think that's a good strategy for Rochester because there isn't as broad of a base, or I at least don't. But I do think we could take part of dollars that are coming, new dollars that are coming into the city and wouldn't without Destination Medical Center, and have that funded, which would guarantee that those costs would not fall on them, and in fact would probably lift some costs off the city. So that's the sort of thinking that could happen. In any case, I do think that as we do these projects, we want to coordinate with the city in as much depth as possible. That is what we do through the capital expense project, and we want to continue to do that. The final point is at, I think the 2-year mark, maybe, Patrick, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but we recognize that instead of setting up a huge economic development entity outside the city for Destination Medical Center, we should instead fund it within the city. The point of that is to be able to do even more alignment and coordination. That, just if we're talking about raw costs, is about doing a better job of coordinating those costs. So in the case of this project, for instance, there were people working directly within the city infrastructure, knowing what the city spending was doing, et cetera, and that person was paid for by the residents of the state of Minnesota, not just the residents of Rochester. And so somebody working within the government of the city was funded by the state. And I think that's wise because of it. No other city in the state has the body that we have here, not only with dollars, but with flexible development tools and all of that sort of thing. And I think that's a good thing because the opportunity is so big here. So as somebody who represents the state at this table, I'm going to continue to advocate that the residents of the state of Minnesota should fund things that in other cases would fall on a taxpayer in just Rochester because of the statewide significance. Mr. Chair, go ahead.
I would just imagine at some point we could do some modeling kind of,
Mhm.
that would just give us projections. I can't imagine that hasn't been done already, actually, where we would see projections of operating costs, sales tax proceeds, in projected increases in sales tax, property tax, those kinds of things, and the impact for the city in the long run, even if it's just a rough estimate, that we should be able to kind of pencil that out, I would imagine.
Whoever you are, you're not as important as Destination Management. Oh, Mom, I'm sorry. Yeah, okay, so Patrick, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, so just want to acknowledge and thank the mayor and the council president for their leadership in helping to navigate this work, and for Member Williams and Member Wheelock in terms of what I'm hearing really is perhaps a deep dive conversation at a future board meeting. I mean, we've probably covered it more, glossed over, and we really haven't had the kind of deep dive that might be appropriate and necessary, and we will be prepared to do that at a coming meeting. And so maybe just Chris, just to wrap up this segment.
Very quickly, just looking ahead and foreshadowing the things that are to come, of course, the Discovery Walk construction project. There'll be a refresh on the business development strategy, and we'll be hearing from Mike Flynn about that shortly. And it's natural to think of a phase 3 project perhaps coming, nothing official or formal or has come forward yet, but there is a space on that lot for one more building, and so that could be in our future.